when Christiana Figueres said, never has so much been in the hands of so few, I understand why she says that. But I don't think it's true. They're not the only ones with power. And I think when we abdicate the power and say, you are the ones, save us, that's when we get ourselves into trouble.
The behaviour of civil society is the most crucial component of all action to tackle climate change. It is civil society who are the end users of legislation, technology, innovation, and other outputs from our civilization. Yet it seems that at a time when we should be united and striving together across borders to restore the damage inflicted on our world, we are divided, called to arms and afraid. And as climate change advances on poorer developing countries or small island developing states, we see their suffering as part of a bigger problem that someone else should deal with.
We have an agreement which doesn't really include strong human rights language. It doesn't even say the word fossil fuels. I mean, it's somehow skewed.
As of yesterday, on Human Rights Day, the French presidency released a new text in which there was a reference to human rights in the preamble only. The reference in the core part of the agreement had been stripped completely.
We are the persons who are dying. My friends, my family, they are the ones who go through water. They are the ones who are killed in avalanches. And they don't even care.
It was too much to ask to have those key issues integrated in the climate agreement. I mean, it seems to be, in my mind, counterintuitive. And I think one of the useful things about human rights language is that it gives us a language to talk about how climate change is a human issue. And that's what that young Indigenous woman was talking about, that this issue fundamentally impacts her life and the existence of her peoples.
Why isn't that same moral imperative there when we're talking about people dying not through terrorism but through climate-related disasters that we are implicated in? We are complicit in that if we do not change the way we produce and consume.
The link between our lifestyles in developed countries and the suffering being experienced in places where climate impacts are already striking is undeniable. The cost of our fast and highly wasteful consumerist culture is destroying the fabric of life on Earth. The challenge for us is to drastically change how we live our lives, not as an aspiration, but as a reality, and in the short term. But how easy is that?
I think there are some things when you start looking at the actual numbers. We are, as a planet, burning fossil fuels and producing about 35 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide every year. And with a population of 7 billion, well, 35 divided by 7, that's 5 tonnes on average of carbon dioxide per person. Now, if I ask every individual on this planet to handle 5 tonnes of waste, whether it be sewage or whether it be garbage from the kitchen, 5 tonnes per year, that's massive. We do not produce 5 tonnes of household waste per year. And yet somehow we're allowed to produce 5 tonnes of CO2 waste per year. Now, if we start to think about how do we manage our lifestyle to reduce our CO2 waste to, say, 1/10 of that, well, that means you have to do essentially 1/10 of what you currently do, because everything we do is written in CO2 ink.
50% of global emissions come from only 10% of the world's population. This 10% consists of the wealthiest people on Earth and includes many of us in developed countries.
What are the things that are our positional goods? I mean, they are consuming more energy, consuming more goods, living in larger houses, bigger cars, flying more exotic holidays, going business class. Everything that we aspire to, everything that says something about our role and our position in society is about more carbon dioxide emissions. So progress and success are measured in dimensions of our society that mean more carbon emissions. If we're serious about 2 degrees C carbon budget, you cannot measure society like that. You have to start to say, well, they are no longer appropriate metrics in the short to medium term for dealing with climate change.
If there is a carbon cost in everything that we consume, then we need to devise a means to change course and reduce this carbon cost to as near to, and then eventually beyond, zero. The carbon budgets put forward by the IPCC provide a means by which policy can be constructed to limit our emissions to reach what is now being termed carbon neutrality. This term is defined by the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies as a state in which the activities of an individual an organisation, a city or a country result in net zero emissions of CO2. Either the activities must release no CO2, or the CO2 they release after decarbonising as much as possible must be permanently sequestered.
The latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is really helpful here. It's the first set of reports that have ever had explicitly put in place these carbon budgets. The problem with carbon budgets, they have really big policy implications. As the old framing, which was a 2050 time frame, really, we could all just rely on engineers solving the problem in 2035 and 2040 and 2050. The carbon budget approach brings it down to what do we do today and what do we do tomorrow. So the political repercussions come out of the science.
However, the carbon budgets were conspicuously absent in the final draft of the Paris Agreement.
Our position has been that we want ambition on climate change, but we do not want climate change to further inequity and inequality in the world. When we look at what is the draft yesterday, one of the worst components of the draft, the difference between the earlier draft, which at least had the mention of the word carbon budget, that is completely missing in the draft that we have last night. And the reason CSE is very concerned about this, and we hope that you will share our concern, is that we know that the question about cutting emissions is really about sharing the limited carbon budget that remains between now and 2100.
The inconvenient truth behind 1.5 degrees, which is expressed through the carbon budget, which is very small, which we still have to spend. This inconvenient truth was just pushed to the sidelines in Paris, of course. So it is the role of science to come back to that, and we have to insist, actually, that only through this rapid transformation of the world economy we can honor our Paris pledges.
So the Paris Agreement, historic in its ambition, leaves us with a void in terms of what is necessary to preserve the future. This void can only be filled by a much more important component, who when mobilised has the potential to change and improve the world that we inhabit. That component is us. It is what we refer to as civil society. This bottom-up approach has proven throughout history to be the most powerful force for change. However, it often feels as if we are socially conditioned to believe we are, as individuals, powerless against the noise of such a complex world. It is exactly the opposite that is true. For years now, many of us have thought that if a leader, like the President of the United States, simply knew how bad the climate was, then he would take action and fix it. Well, he does, and he can't. Politics is powerful, but it is also highly susceptible to outside forces. Powerful lobby groups, such as the fossil fuel industry, spend billions of dollars trying to influence policy in their favour. Another group, often unfunded, is civil society. Us, who are represented outside the halls of power. It doesn't matter if we live in a Western democracy or not. Those governing pay close attention to polls and other social data, eventually resulting in shifts in policy that suit the needs of the day. In this period of transformation of our societies, our energy systems, our consumption patterns and much more, it comes down to every one of us who is able to examine the dominant narrative of this century and find ways to express it in our own language and lives.
Bangladesh, I would argue, is on the one hand one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change, from floods and droughts and hurricanes. On the other hand, I would argue Bangladesh is probably one of the most aware and now one of the most forward-thinking and moving countries tackling climate change. Now, how effective that is very much a function of what kind of agreement we have. If we go to 3 degrees and over, then there's very little we can do about that. Then by that time, it's chaos everywhere. If we can keep the temperature down to 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees as we want, then we can adapt to that. Okay? So it's extremely critical that we have a 1.5 degree long-term goal to give us a chance to adapt to.
We have to evolve, and we have to make a leap. And we can't get there with short steps. So we have to give back to nature. We've been taking from nature too long. We have not had a reciprocal relationship with nature. We need to give back as much as we take. We need to get in sync with nature. Some of this wisdom we have from indigenous peoples, and many of them are at this meeting, and they can tell us in very clear terms we must live in harmony with nature.
But in order to give back to nature, we must not allow ourselves to be consumed by bad policies. Instead, we must become active and create new policies that will shape the world we want to inhabit.
I mean, everything is political. We get the politics that we demand, that we put pressure on.
There's a strange combination of people for very diverse reasons say the only thing I want to avoid is that my money, if I'm an institutional investor where I just have a small bank account, I don't want my money to be invested in destroying this planet. I want my money invested, however small it is, into preserving creation.
For us, it needs to be a key priority to keep building a climate movement and to keep making sure that within that movement, women are visible and have a strong voice. Indigenous people are visible, have a strong voice.
I'm sorry, my friends, but we need civil society to rise up. We have done what we can under these negotiations, and we now call for civil society to rise. Push your ministers. We need human rights, indigenous people's rights within that agreement in order to stop violations, killings, murders, land grabbing, and to save the planet for our future.
We don't need to look to governments to provide the answer to these problems.